Alright everyone, welcome to another Skynamic tutorial. Today is April 29th, 2018. It's 5:08 p.m. and this is our 7th Flash animation tutorial, or Intro to Flash animation tutorial. So today we're going to learn about puppet animation. In particular, we'll be learning about the puppet animation pipeline. So I'm not going to be animating anything in front of you guys today. That's going to be our 8th tutorial, which will be our next one. This tutorial is mainly a lecture about the puppet animation pipeline. So specifically, we're going to be starting at the very beginning. We're going to talk about how to write a really good screenplay, where you go next from a screenplay as you start doing storyboards, and then we talk about creating animatics and how to import FLVs into Flash. Then how to prep our Flash files for puppet animation, and what you should already have vectored and created before you start animating. Then we'll talk about the actual different phases of animating in and of itself. How to do rough posing, how to do puppet posing, how to draw in extra parts to add into the puppets, how to do breakdowns, lip syncing, and all the cool different tips and tricks regarding doing really good lip syncing. And then we'll end off the lecture by talking about in-betweens, which is going to be the final stage of animation. And then that's it. It's just a very big lecture. A lot of this is meant to be experienced in real time. So obviously, for those of you that are currently with me today watching this from our live stream, it's going to feel a little janky to you. But I promise that if you're just going to watch the recording of this tutorial later on, it'll feel a lot better. You'll feel like you get the fuller experience from watching everything in real time. So let's start off with a screenplay. So the first step in any animated production, well, honestly, the first step in any production period is to write out your screenplay. Now, this is usually handed off to a screenwriter or just a writer in general. For Skynamic Studios, this is mainly Allison. Allison does most of our writing. And it's her job, it's the writer's job, to narrate the character's movements, actions, expressions, and dialogues. But you also want to be careful. You don't want to describe too much in a screenplay. Otherwise, you're going to hamper the storyboarder later on down the line. You want to give the storyboarder a little bit of creative freedom to sort of put in their own sort of personality and twists into the way that they're describing the world and the character's actions. But you also want to, you don't want to do too little. You want to give that storyboarder enough to go off of so they understand what you, the writer, are trying to convey through the screenplay. So the really cool thing about today's tutorial is I'm actually going to take you from start to finish on a piece of animation from our Caleb promo, which we did back in 2014. So here's the screenplay for that Caleb promo. Starts off with an establishing shot, so interior white room day. Caleb stands looking at a crudely made practice dummy that sits on top of a large spring. Under the springs are a small wooden base with 4 small wheels on it. He draws his sword with an amateur flair. Caleb, excited to self. Huzzah! Now this is important. You'll notice that underneath Caleb's name, and before we get to the dialogue, there is a little thing in parentheses that is describing the inflection of the character. In other words, how is he saying this? Which is important, because this screenplay is handed off not only to storyboarders for storyboarding, and that inflection is going to determine what kind of facial expression or body pose we want to put them in. But it's also being handed off to our voice director and our voice actors. And they need to know, how are they supposed to speak this line? How do we record this line? So that little thing of inflection is something that should be there for every single piece of dialogue whenever you write out a screenplay. It's very important to have that. Let's keep going. Caleb considers how best to attack and crouches ready to pounce. Caleb attacks the dummy with a flurry of blows, crouching and pouncing and leaping around the dummy with quick but unskilled motions. Caleb, dramatic to villagers pretending. Stay back, villagers! I'll save you! Caleb continues to attack the dummy and kicks it with a little kitten-sized final thrust. It slowly rolls off screen. Oh, and let me actually click on Flash here. There we go. Caleb, triumphant, pretending. And now you are safe. Caleb stands proudly, looking to imagined villagers as a real skeleton enters and stands where the fake one was. The skeleton prepares to attack Caleb. Caleb to villagers. You see, they're not that dangerous. They just need a little understanding. Caleb turns toward the skeleton and puts his arm around it, thinking it's the dummy. The skeleton growls, and Caleb realizes it's real. Caleb shrieks and darts away. The skeleton chases him. They bounce around the room as Caleb struggles to unsheath his dirk. Caleb, afraid, "No, no, no, no!" to self, encouraging, "Come on, Caleb, you've trained for this." Caleb turns to face the skeleton with his back to a wall. The practice dummy is visible far behind the real skeleton. Caleb, reassuring, "I have trained for this." Caleb holds out his dirk as if he's going to attack the skeleton. The skeleton charges, and Caleb dives between its legs. Caleb races towards the practice dummy and pulls it back on its spring. The skeleton chases him and hits the dummy. Caleb releases the dummy, and the skeleton is catapulted into the sky. Caleb watches the skeleton fly through the air. Caleb, happy and triumphant, "I hope you have wings!" Caleb, also happy and triumphant. And Caleb Truetail saves the day again. That's right, his last name used to be Truetail. Not anymore. The skeleton smashes apart villagers on impact. Caleb is stunned by this and glances at the dummy. Caleb leans on the dummy. Caleb, awkward, "You won't tell anyone about this, right?" The dummy rolls away, making Caleb fall over. Title animation end. So again, that's a great example of a very short and sweet little minute-and-a-half screenplay. In fact, usually when you're writing a screenplay, one page you can sort of guesstimate as being equal to 60 seconds of screen time. So if you want to write a 60-minute screenplay, then you would write a 60-page screenplay. Now, that's not universally true. Sometimes it can wind up being 30 seconds. Sometimes it can wind up being 2 minutes. It depends. But generally speaking, most of the time, one page is 60 seconds. Now, that screenplay that I just read out for you, you'll realize that it narrated the character's movements. What is the character doing? It narrated their actions. How are they interacting with the world around them? Their expressions. Are they stunned? Are they smiling? Are they grinning? Are they pouting? And of course their dialogue, as well as the inflection regarding that dialogue. That's a good screenplay. That is exactly what you should aim for if you are trying to write out a screenplay for an animated project that you plan on working on. Now, after that screenplay has been written and tweaked and edited and it's perfect, that's then handed off to a storyboard artist. Now, a storyboard artist's job is to translate the screenplay into a visual story, panel by panel, kind of like a comic book. Now, good storyboards will take a screenplay and convey that screenplay using three things. It'll convey the action, it'll convey the dialogue, and it'll convey the camera. So let's take a look at the storyboards for that particular screenplay I just talked about. So here we are. The silhouette of a monster jumps up from the bottom of the screen as the background turns from white to red. We zoom out. Cut to a low angle. Caleb jumps down in front of the villagers from the upper screen. We pan up. Caleb, huzzah! Cut to a different wide shot. Caleb reaches behind his back, speaking, "Stay back, villagers. I'll save you." And as he pulls out his sword, we kind of zoom out from him. Then we kind of cut to just a wide shot of this dummy. A little eye spring pops out of its head. Then we cut to Caleb, to a medium shot of Caleb, as he screams a battle cry, and he runs towards the dummy and swings his sword. Ah! Kind of points it towards the front. Cut back to the dummy, a close-up of its head, and whacks the dummy with the head of the sword, and then whacks it again. And then we cut to a wide shot, and Caleb stabs the dummy, but he kind of has trouble pulling his sword out. Cut to the same angle a little bit later. He bites on the dummy's head while beating on it with his fists. Cut to another shot. He's whacking the dummy repeatedly with his sword. Cut back. Nothing's here. Ah! He jumps in and pounces on the dummy, only to be thrown back off of the dummy. Ah! Cut to a medium shot as he lands on his back. Unfazed, Caleb glares at his opponent and then jumps off screen. Ah! We have this epic medium shot of Caleb kicking towards the camera. Cut to a close-up of the dummy's body, and Caleb kicks the dummy's body. Cut to a low angle of the dummy. The dummy is rolling backwards slightly and slows to a stop while Caleb kind of lands. Cut to a medium shot, and Caleb is panting out of exhaustion. And then as he kind of gets his breath, he sort of walks off screen with pride while also saying, "And now you're safe." And he walks off screen. And then we cut and pan tracking Caleb, and he's sort of walking to screen left. And he says, "You see, they're not that dangerous. They just need a little understanding," as he pats on what he thinks is the dummy. But then he realizes what he is patting, and there's a growl coming from off screen. And cut to Caleb POV, and we're panning up. Ah, the skeleton roars at Caleb. And then we cut to this other shot now, and we hear this as Caleb's running for his life off screen, and skeleton's chasing him. Cut to a medium shot of Caleb as he's reaching back and taking out his sword. No, 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 no! And the camera rotates around him to show the skeleton. Caleb looks at his sword. We cut to a POV, a point of view shot of Caleb as he's looking at his sword. "Come on, Caleb. You've trained for this." Cut. Caleb turns and skids to a halt as he turns around. Caleb notices something in the distance, though. Cut to an over-the-shoulder shot, and we zoom all the way past the dummy. It's the dummy! Cut to a close-up as he sort of grips his sword tighter, and he says, "I have trained for this." The skeleton makes his jump towards Caleb as we cut to that. Cut back to a skeleton point of view shot now, and we zoom in, and then Caleb kind of rushes toward the skeleton and slides under it, with the skeleton barely missing Caleb. The skeleton skids to a halt and starts running after Caleb again on all fours. Cut to a wide shot. Caleb runs towards the dummy, jumps up, and pins it to the ground. Caleb sticks his sword into the ground, and we kind of zoom out as he looks back over his shoulder at the skeleton. Cut to an over-the-shoulder shot. We see the skeleton running towards Caleb. Cut to a wide shot. Caleb holds onto the dummy till the last second. Bam! Caleb lets go, causing the dummy to crash into the skeleton and launching it into the air. Cut. We see the skeleton kind of flying off into the distance as Caleb revels in his success. "I hope you have wings!" And Caleb Truetail saves the day again. Cut. We see the shadow of the skeleton looming over the villagers. Bam! The skeleton crashes into the villagers, obliterating everyone. Cut to a wide shot of Caleb and the dummy. Caleb is stunned by this. Kind of glances at the dummy. Caleb leans on the dummy. "You won't tell anyone about this, right?" Dummy rolls away, making Caleb fall over. Ugh. And then we cut, and the Truetail logo smashes into the center of the screen. Bam! So that was 98 panels. So for just that minute and a half, about a page and a half, it took us 98 panels to storyboard out that entire sequence from start to finish. And you'll notice that most every single shot has multiple panels to describe what the character is doing, how characters are entering frame, how characters are exiting frame. The camera angles themselves are very dynamic. We're using low angles and high angles and wide shots and close-up shots and Dutch angles, and we're making a very visually appealing storyboard to make, hopefully, a visually appealing animation to stem from that. So this isn't necessarily a storyboarding tutorial. We will eventually have one of those later on. But I just wanted to kind of let you guys know sort of some of the little basics the foundations that you should sort of adhere to when it comes to storyboarding out something from a screenplay. Now, once you have a storyboard and it's been edited and tweaked and perfected over many, many, many variations, we then hand that off to an editor. And the editor will take those storyboards and they'll toss them into Flash or After Effects or Adobe Premiere, and they'll basically time everything out to scratch track or to the actual dialogue recorded lines if we have them, and they'll time out everything and actually figure out, all right, so how long is this actually? Let's pace it all out. Let's edit it all together. So we have the animatic for this particular storyboard. I have the Flash file in here that we could just play, But just to make it a little bit easier, I actually do legitimately have that animatic here as an MOV file. So I'm going to open that up and I'm going to play that for us right now.
Huzzah! Stay back, villagers! I'll save you! Ah! Ha! And now you are safe. Ah, you see? They're not that dangerous. They just need a little understanding. No, no. Come on, Caleb. You've trained for this. Yeah, I have trained for this. I hope you have wings! And Caleb Truetail saves the day again! You won't tell anyone about this, right?
And there you have it. Ah! We're not ready to watch that yet. So there you have it. So that's our animatic for that Caleb promo. And going all the way from screenplay, well, actually just going from idea to writing out the screenplay and finessing the screenplay and doing all the edits, handing off to storyboarding and going through all the edits and tweaks for boarding until we got it perfected, then handing off to an editor to get all the animatics done and timed out and perfected and the dialogue recorded. That process is known as pre-production. It's everything we do in the pre-production phase of the pipeline, and it usually takes like a good solid 2 to 3 months, because we want to make sure that everything is perfect. We are building the foundation from which we will actually continue on and finesse and perfect this amazing animation from start to finish. So that pre-production phase of the pipeline usually is the longest phase of the pipeline, because we just got to make sure that everything's perfect. We don't want to start animating and creating assets for something if we don't know if we're going to keep it or not. Storyboards are changing so often and so many times that you just, generally speaking, want to wait until the animatic is done before you start actually creating all the final assets and getting ready for puppeting and animation and all that stuff. So once you have a finished animatic, and then assuming that you've also built all the puppets and, you know, done all the backgrounds and vectored out all the props and you have everything ready for animating, the next step is to actually start prepping your Flash files for animation. Now, if you're using Adobe Flash CS6 and down, the way that you get an animatic in the program is one of two ways. One, just create the entire animatic in Flash. Put the entire animatic inside of a symbol, and then there you go, you've got your animatic. That's what we've done. When we created this original animatic, the whole thing is actually a thing here inside of Flash. So we actually have the whole thing timed out and animated all here in Flash for that whole animatic. So that's one way of doing it. But let's say that for some, I don't know, ungodly reason, you decided that you didn't want to create that animatic in Flash, and you created it in Adobe After Effects or Storyboard Pro for Toon Boom, or you did it in Adobe Premiere or whatever. What you would then do is you would export it out as a video file, whether it's a QuickTime or a Move or an MP4 or whatever. But then you'd want to run it through Adobe Media Encoder or a similar program to transform it into what is known as an FLV. Now, an FLV is a specific type of video file made specifically for bringing into Adobe Flash. So if you export it as an FLV, for example, I have an FLV over here. I should. Now I've got the Move file. Do I have the FLV file? I don't. Well, If I did, I would just drag the FLV file right into Adobe Flash. And then when I do, it'll give me the import video menu, which is going to ask me a whole bunch of different questions. Like, how do you want to, like, where is your video file? You know, is it on my computer, etc., etc. Generally speaking, you want to select the middle option, embed FLV in SWIF and play in timeline. I could have swore I had that FLV in here. I do have it. Yeah, okay. I knew I had it. So, for example, if I were to create a new document right now real fast, and let's go ahead and set this to 1920 by 1080 because that's the size of this animation. Now if I drag this in, bam, preparing to import. So give it one moment. There. Import video. You always want to embed the FLV in the SWIF and play in timeline. If you try to load it as an external video with playback component, at least for Adobe Flash CS6 and down, it doesn't work. It's never worked. It's a horrible glitchy mess. But embedding the FLV in the SWIF and playing in the timeline, that's the way you want to go. So you click on Next. And then it's asking, how would you like to embed the video? Would you want to make it embedded? Do you want to upload it as a movie clip? Do you want to upload it as a graphic? My advice is upload it as a graphic symbol. And then place it on the stage, expand the timeline, and include the audio. And click Next. And then, you're using this video, blah, 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 finish. And there we go. So what it did is it took that entire video, that FLV video, and it's all one graphic symbol now. If I double click it, I've got the whole video playing here of that entire animatic. But one thing you'll very quickly realize is that even though I had the bring in the audio as one of those selected options, it didn't actually bring in the audio with it. It's something that Flash has always done, which has always been extremely annoying. So what you would have to do is you'd have to go find that audio file, which I've got as a separate file over here, and you would bring that audio file into the program and actually do it as a separate item. Now this is exactly 301 frames. So basically we would make this 301 frames out here, F5, and that would cover this entire thing. For just this particular FLV. You'll notice that this FLV isn't of the entire animatic. You would never upload an entire minute-and-a-half video into one Flash file. It will crash the program. So you want to actually cut up your animatic into pieces, preferably along areas where it wouldn't create a shot-to-shot continuity error between two shots. So for the remainder of this tutorial, I'm actually just going to look at this one part right here. The part where Caleb is thrown back, gets back up, does this cool commando kick in the air, kicks the dummy rolls back, he lands, he's breathing hard, he has his one line of dialogue, and then he walks off screen. And that's for the rest of this tutorial. We're only going to focus on that one area right there, because that's the way that we split this up when we animated this 4 years ago. It's been a while. Okay, so let's come back over to our tutorial over here. So after you've put the animatic inside of Flash, the next step is to start prepping your file for animation and setting it up for layout. We call this Flash Prep. I've actually, when I worked at Floyd County Productions, they called it layout. They actually called this phase layout. So we were laying out the Flash files for animators. But I always found that very confusing because the term layout officially stands for background. It stands for environment drawings. So I was always very confused by the fact that they also used it for Flash Prep. Here at Skynamic, we refer to it as Flash Prep. We're prepping the Flash files for animation. So you want to make sure that Oh, did someone talk there?
In Canada, they typically call it character setup. That's what they usually call it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think every studio has their own pet name for it. But you want to make sure that you have your audio. You want to make sure that you have your frame guide and your masking. You want to make sure that you have your notes and your shot layers. In other words, your X sheets. And we want to make sure that we have our animatic and that we have all of our puppets and our assets that we're going to be handing off to the animators for them to animate with. As long as you have all of this stuff, you are then ready to start prepping your Flash file for animation. Now, I'm going to prep it right in front of you guys. In fact, I've even created a very handy step-by-step process to explain exactly how to go about prepping a Flash file. It's a little difficult, it's a little convoluted, but that's why I have a step-by-step guide. So I'm going to prep it right in front of you guys. So the very first step is to import the animatic into preferably a 1920 by 1080 document, or any format that's 16 by 9 to be honest with you. Make sure that the document's timeline is the same length as the animatic. And keep in mind that we don't want to go longer than 30 seconds in one Flash file. If your animatic is longer than that, make sure you're splitting it up into multiple Flash files. So I've already done that over here. We have the animatic. I already timed out the entire outside of it to match the inside of it, which was 301 frames. Excellent. So let's go back over here. What's step 2? Import your audio as a single file into your document on a new layer called audio, since the animatic doesn't have it, because Flash sucks. Make sure the audio is synced up with the animatic and that we've set the publish settings to 128 kilobytes per second and the audio sync to stream. So let's do that right now. I'm actually going to rename this layer. I'm going to call this layer animatic. I'm going to create a new layer above it, and I'm going to call this layer sound. Or I could call it audio. Either or, it doesn't matter. Now that I've got that layer selected, I'm going to go grab the audio, which is a WAV file right here. I'm going to drag that in. So nothing really happens, which is a little weird, right? But if I go to library, that sound file did appear. If I just drag that back out of the library, there it goes. Now it's appeared over here, which is great. Now if I were to hit that enter button...
And now, you...
Yeah, but see how it didn't actually time everything out correctly? That's because I have to go to File, Publish Settings, and set my audio stream to 160. Just go to the highest setting. Same thing with audio event. Put it all the way to 160. Then hit OK. And also, if I select any frame on this audio layer, under Properties, make sure the sync is set to Stream, which it was by default, so that's nice. Normally, it defaults it to Event, which sucks. Now that the whole thing is set to Stream, let's try playing that again and see if it timed out properly.
And now, you...
Interesting. It's still not timing out all the way. Part of me feels like there is more to this scene than there should be. No, that's right. I think You Are Safe was added into the next shot for this. Let's double check. It's always good to listen to the sound file and just double check it. Let's go all the way to the end here.
Are safe. And now, you are safe.
No, he definitely says, and you are safe. So it could just be that Flash isn't playing it at the right amount of time. Let's see here.
You...
No, it legitimately needs to be longer, so we actually need to make this even longer. I wonder if it's this FLV that I brought in is not being played at the right time. Interesting. I've been teaching this tutorial for years and I've never had this problem before. Odd. Well, in that case, let's try this. Let's try to let's delete this FLV, because definitely it should be ending right here, because that's how long the sound file is, right? So it should actually be 327 frames, or 13.6 seconds, right? So if I were to go to this asset and open up the properties for it, I should be able to see how long this is in the details. unless my computer isn't recognizing it as a movie file, which then it won't give me the actual length for it, which is very annoying. Well, let's try this. I always keep Adobe Animate open just in case. I wonder if this just might be a Flash CS6 thing. So I'm going to drag that FLV here into Adobe Animate, and let's see if it does the exact same mistake. You guys will run into this problem sometimes. It's always good to troubleshoot. Same exact settings. So how long is it in here? No, it's also 301 frames. Interesting. So if I were to grab that audio file, drag that audio file in, let's try that. Oh, and put it on the right frame. Go over here. Yes, replace. Oh, look at that.
You are safe.
So it wasn't the video file, it was the audio file that was causing us problems. So now that we know that it works in Adobe Animate, we can basically come back over to here, undo the deletion of that, and put that video back in here. Just hit Control-Z a couple times and go back. There we go. So the video is actually perfect. It's the audio file that was brought in that stretched out for some unknown reason. So let's try this. Let's go back to the library. Let's grab that audio file and let's delete it. And let's try bringing that audio file back into this program. For some weird reason, Flash CS6 is stretching out the audio file. Let's bring that back in. And then again, it shows up over here. So let's drag it back in. And did it stretch it again? Doesn't look like it did. So let's see here. Let's swift this out. Control Enter.
And now you are safe.
It's playing two sounds. I wonder if it's because of the animatic. Did the animatic actually come with sound even though it's not letting us edit the sound? Control Enter. It is. That is extremely annoying, Flash. Oh, man. All right. Let's try this then. Let's bring that animatic back in. We're going to embed the FLV in Swift and play in timeline. Next. Don't include audio. Next. And let's try that. Now if I Control Enter, it swifts it, but there's no audio playing. That way I can still have the audio as a separate file. And let's bring that here as well. Asset sound, drag it in. Here it is. Drag it on down. Now, Control Enter, and let's see if it works.
And now you are safe.
No, it's definitely playing slower. I don't understand why it's playing slower. Weird.
You are safe.
Very odd. Well, Phil, you're here. You ever run into this problem before?
With like slowdown?
Yeah, like the audio file is purposefully slowing itself down. In fact, I have run into this. It's the way that it was rendered out from After Effects, either at 44 hertz or 48 hertz.
Yeah, that's typically what happens.
Yeah.
It's exported at a different wavelength, so when you run it into like a higher FPS, it lags.
I think so. I think it's legitimately because this was not exported at 44 hertz. Now, here's the thing. I've been teaching this particular tutorial for nearly 4 years now, and I've never run into this problem. However, I've never taught this particular tutorial using Flash CS6. I always do it in Adobe Animate. So my advice is that if you are watching this tutorial and you're using Flash CS6, you're going to have to make sure that your audio file, when you render it out from After Effects or you render out using whatever sound program you have, make sure it's set to 48 hertz, not 44. 44 will actually lag it. So that's why it's causing this problem. So we're going to keep doing this tutorial from Adobe Animate. Just because I want to make sure that, you know, this is all fixed. So I do apologize for those of you that are watching this recording. Normally these recordings are perfect, and I don't really have a lot of problems with them. But let this also serve as an example to you. Not everything goes well. Sometimes you think something is supposed to work and it doesn't. So don't get panicked. Don't stress out over it. Do some troubleshooting. Try to open it up in a different program. Try to listen to it. Try to look at the details for it. Troubleshoot it. And I promise you, if you approach it calmly and collected, you'll always discover the actual problem and you'll be able to work around it. So our workaround for this particular recording is to continue on using Adobe Animate instead.
I mean, I'm not entirely surprised by that. That's a really old file.
It was. It was pretty old. It's 4 years old, and yeah, it's pretty crazy. So here's what I'm going to do then. We're gonna work from Adobe Animate. We'll still come back over to CS6 to look at the lecture. That's how we'll play it. All right. So after you've imported the audio file in there alongside the animatic, go ahead and create a new layer at the very top and name it shot number. Then using the animatic as a guide, place a blank keyframe every time it cuts to a new shot. Then select each keyframe, and in the properties window under name, write out shot 1, shot 2, etc., etc. So if I come over to the animatic, let's just kind of, well, first, let's just make sure that my published settings are, again, set to the highest possible setting. It always defaults to 16 kilobytes per second, and that always sucks. And, again, make sure that the sync is set to stream, and it is. Excellent. So, go until a new shot comes, which is right here between frames 54 and 55. So create a new layer. We're going to call this layer shot number. On a new shot, we'll place a blank keyframe. On this keyframe, we'll call it shot 1. On this keyframe, we'll call it shot 2. And see how it's popping up down here on the layer? Alright, here we go. Between 93 and 94. 93 and 94. So right here, blank keyframe. And we'll call this shot 3. And it pops up down here. Let's keep going. Oh. So between 117 and 118, F7. And we'll call this shot 4. Oh, we almost had it. So between 181 and 182. So right here, another blank keyframe and shot 5, which should be the last shot. Double check this real fast. Yes. So there are 5 shots. So we've listed out the shot numbers. Excellent. Let's go back over to our lecture. Step 4. Create a new layer and name it frame guide. Then go ahead and create your frame guide and mask on this layer. So let's come back over to here. We're going to create a new layer. Call this layer frame guide. And just like I showed you guys in one of our earlier tutorials, we want to create a frame guide real fast. So I'll grab my rectangle tool, lower the fill, just create a random rectangle. Grab that rectangle, go to align, make sure align to stage is checked, and you want it to match the width and height of the stage. Then align it along the vertical center and the horizontal center, or the horizontal center and vertical center. Then copy, Control-Shift-V to paste in place, grab your transform tool, and basically scale this puppy out. Kind of like that. Then what you could do is you could grab a nice black, maybe lower the opacity to a 75%, and fill it in. And then I'm going to get rid of the stroke over here. Sorry, delete on my keyboard. Delete. Oh, it's because that is selected, which is a little weird. Select, delete. Don't know why it's deleting the alpha over here. What the hell? Grab that, set it to none. There, that's another way of doing it. Again, there's always 12 different ways of doing the exact same thing. Don't get frustrated. Set that to red, because I like it to be a red stroke. There we go. And now what I can do is I can also take that, copy it, Control-Shift-V to paste it in place. And I'm just going to create a little bit of a safety area inside of here. I'm just going to eyeball it. Then I'll grab this brush again and set it to a 25% alpha and fill that in. That's a nice frame guide. That means that my animators can turn this on and off, and they can sort of very quickly at a glance see what is in frame and what is out of frame. Now keep in mind that if you really are legitimately using Adobe Animate, you don't have to create this frame guide. Adobe has actually built in a frame guide with this button right here, clip content outside the stage. So if I were to have some content outside the stage, let me grab a different color that we can actually see, like neon green, like that. Obviously the frame guide that I created is a great way of masking that out to see what is in frame and what is out of frame. But so is this button up here in Adobe Animate, clip content outside the stage. It does the exact same thing. Let me undo that. Alright, so we've got our frame guide. Let's come back over to here. Step 5. Select your animatic and create a new symbol with it. So select the animatic and then create a symbol using that animatic. Name this symbol _scene_master clip. This will be your master symbol that contains your entire scene. From here on out, you will work exclusively inside of this symbol. Okay. So select the animatic, which I've just done. Modify, convert to symbol. Set it to a graphic symbol and call it scene master clip. And hit OK. This video requires 301 frames to display its entire length. The selected timeline span is not long enough. Do you want the required number of frames automatically inserted into the timeline span? I'm going to say no, simply because if this was Adobe Flash CS6, this option wouldn't even appear. I want to do it manually, so let's just say no for now. Now in my library, I should have a scene master clip symbol. Excellent. Step 6. Copy and paste your audio and shot number layers into the scene master clip symbol, then extend the timeline's frames to match them. So I'm going to grab the frame guide. Sorry, not the frame guide. I'm going to put that up here. So shot number audio. I'm going to copy those frames. Then I'm going to double click the animatic symbol to go inside of it. Although it's not an animatic anymore. I'm going to rename this and call it master clip. So I'm going to double click my master clip. I'm now inside of the scene master clip symbol. I'm going to rename this to animatic. And I believe it was 301 frames. So, well, actually, even if I don't know, I can create a new layer, paste my frames, and it pastes the shot number and the audio. And that will tell me how long it is. It's right here, F5, 301 frames. It's very important that everything inside of the symbol match what is outside of the symbol. That's what we're doing right now. So the outside is 301 frames, the inside is 301 frames. Okay, let's go back to our tutorial over here. Step 7. One by one, import your scene's assets into the scene master clip symbol, taking care to place each one on its own layer. This includes characters, props, backgrounds, and other assets needed to animate your scene. So let's do that. Let's go inside of the master clip, which we are. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this layer Caleb. Then I've already got a Caleb puppet asset right here, so I'm going to grab that. I'm going to open that up in Flash. And there he is, our old Caleb. Let's grab that. Copy that symbol, Control-C. Come back over here and Control-V. There he is. He's now been pasted inside. Okay. Close that. What else do I need? Well, he's got a dirk, a sword, which we've already vectored out with all 360 views that the sword possibly makes. Yeah, we were pretty crazy back then. But it's all inside of one symbol. So I'm going to grab that symbol, copy, come over here. And I'm going to go inside of the Caleb puppet, create a new layer at the very, very top above everything. Rename this to sword. Paste it inside of his symbol. And then resize it down to the size that it's actually supposed to be for his character. That way it's inside of his symbol. Just to make it easier for the animators. I've got a dummy puppet right here. So let's grab that. Here it is, already all vectored out. And even inside of it, it's got all the other views for that as well. Although I think for this particular one, it's just this. So copy, come back over here. Let's create a new layer, and we'll call this layer dummy. Paste. There it is. We'll get rid of this needs color concept note because we don't really need that. So close that flash file, close that flash file. What else? We've got villagers puppets. What are these? Oh, these are the actual puppet villagers. We need those as well. So I'm going to grab just the front view because I think I only need the front view for this particular shot. Create a new layer, call this layer villagers, and paste. And there we go. Excellent. So that's all the assets I need to animate this scene. Let's come back over here. So I've imported them all in. They're all on their own layers, which is awesome. So step 8, copy and paste your audio and shot number layers into each of your assets symbols, then extend the timeline frames inside of those to match them. Make sure you do this for any nested symbols inside of those assets as well. For example, a character's master clip and head clip. So yeah, so let's start with Caleb. Let's go inside of Caleb's symbol. Basically, create a new layer up here. Right click, paste frames to paste in that shot number and audio number. Just like that. Right? And they said extend it to match, right? Let's go back over here and double check. Extend the timeline's frames to match them. Okay. So, let's do that. F5. Now it matches. Let me do the same thing inside of his head clip as well. Double click to go inside his head clip. Create a new layer above everything. Paste frames. Come all the way to the end. Come all the way down here. F5. Alright, so now the inside of his head is 301 frames. And the inside of his master clip is 301 frames. Again, we want everything that's going to be animated inside of to always match the timeline. So his body and his head both have 301 frames. And the shot number and audio number layer. And we would basically do that for every single symbol. So if I were to jump back out, let's go find that dummy again. Double click to go inside the dummy. Create a new layer. Grab this layer. Paste frames. Come all the way to the end. Come all the way down here. F5. Now that dummy has a head. Again, because we're going to be animating this head separately. Right click, paste frames, come all the way to the end. F5. That way the inside of the head has 301 frames, and the body has 301 frames. And we would do that for everything. Every single one of these dummies is a puppet that has a body and a head. Every single one of them, we would copy and paste, extend them out. Basically, we want every single thing that's going to have animation inside of it be the exact same number of frames, shot number, and audio as what's all the way out here. I'm not going to do that, though. I'm just going to do it for Caleb and the dummy because, you know, this is a tutorial. You can do that on your own if you're doing something like this. Okay, what's the next step? So, step 9. If you have any assets with multiple views nested inside them, then drag those frames to after the end of your scene's timeline. For example, if your scene is 100 frames long, then your multiple views should begin at frame 101. So if we come into Caleb's symbol here, Caleb has multiple views that we've written. Sorry, his audio layer's turned on. So I would grab all of these views that he's got, which is all the way to here. Grab all of that. Drag all of it to after. And give Adobe Animate a moment here. There we go. So now all of his views don't start until after the animation ends. The animation ends on frame 301. That means that all of his views that are over here won't actually show up in the final animation. They're outside of the animation. And I'll do the same thing for the inside of his head as well. So he's got multiple views for the inside of his head. Again, grab all these. Come all the way down here. Grab all those views. Drag them all to after the animation ends. Bam. Give it a moment. And there we go. So again, it's not going to show up in the final animation because it's past the end of the animation. Okay. I would do that for the dummy as well and everything as well, but you get the gist of it by now. So, step 10. Then, Alt plus left mouse click and drag the asset's first view's keyframes back to frame 1 of each nested symbol. This will copy them so that the entire timeline is now only the first view. So, in other words, grab the very first view, just like this, hold down Alt and drag all the way back to frame 1, and then let go. And what that does is it copies the front view all the way so that now the entire animation is just the front view. Same thing with the body. So again, grab the front view, Alt, drag all the way back to frame 1. So the entire shot, the entire animation, is just the front view of Caleb. That way the animator starts off the animation with the front view, and they can go all the way outside of the animation and grab other angles as they need them. And we would do that with every single puppet as well. Now, back in the Scene Master Clip symbol, using your animatic as a guide, place a keyframe down on each asset's layer every time it cuts to a new shot. Then resize and move them so that they match each shot's first frame. So come back over here. Let's double click back out. Now what I might do is, because I want to make this dummy useful, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing I just did to Caleb to this dummy. Grab this very first one, drag it all the way to the end. So it's over here. Although he doesn't have multiple views, so I don't need to do that. All I have to do is just get rid of this keyframe right here, Shift F6. There. Although I could have swore that he did have multiple views. Is it inside of his symbol? I'm going to go back to that dummy puppet real fast. Ah, look at that. All of his views were over here. So he wasn't actually nested inside of a main symbol like he was supposed to be. So that's the kind of thing where what I might want to do is take all of these and put them inside of a dummy master symbol, which wasn't done for this particular file. So that's okay. I'll do it the cheap way. I'm not going to use my Flash Whip frames to symbol extension because you guys might not have that installed. So how do we get all of these inside of a symbol? Very easy. Temporarily create some kind of weird shape. Nah. Grab this dummy, right-click, copy frames, select that shape. While that shape is selected, F8 to convert a symbol. I'm going to call this dummy. Let's do this. Let's underscore dummy master clip. Kind of like this. Double-click to go inside, delete that temporary shape, right-click, paste frames. There. Now this entire dummy is all inside of here. Although technically, he also has a whole bunch of layers in here for his body parts as well. Which, generally speaking, you'd want to break apart and make it look like our Caleb symbol. So it might be better to actually do something like this, where each one of these dummies is just a different puppet. That'll be a better way of going about it. So what I would need to do is, as I go about timing this thing out, if I see a different angle of the dummy, I'll have to bring that particular dummy's angle in and go through it that way. For example, this dummy here, which doesn't have all of his views. So, there we are. There is a dummy master. Oh, I just created that. Ha. But the all symbol, if If I drag this out real fast, it doesn't actually have all of it in it. Okay, that's fine. So, bam, we'll come back over here. We've got this dummy. So, this is perfectly fine. It's been stretched out to match the 301 frames. There are no other views of the dummy that we want to have in this particular symbol. So that's where we would then go inside of the head clip. And we've already done it. It's already stretched out to 301 frames. Excellent. So now we come back out to the master clip that we're inside of. And we would start putting down keyframes to move these guys around. For example, these guys should be a little bit smaller and put over here to match the animatic, right? The dummy is not in this shot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find the shot where he appears for the first time, which it looks like this particular dummy is shot 4. And on that layer, I'll put down a keyframe and then delete him from here. That way he doesn't appear until shot 4. And then Caleb is a lot bigger for this shot, so let's make him big, about the size that he should be. Put him right there. So there, shot 1. Then shot 2, put down a keyframe on Caleb, get him to the right size. He'd be a little bit smaller right here and kind of put over here. The dummies don't appear in this shot, so go F7 to put a blank keyframe. Go to shot 3. This is where we have a different version of the dummy. So I might call this dummy full and create a whole nother layer and call this dummy side. And then right here is when the dummy side should be popping up. So now I go back to that dummy layer, go find that rigged dummy side, which is right here. So I would grab both of these frames. So let's do this. Let's go grab both of these, shift click, right click, copy these frames, come back over to this other file, and right click, paste frames. That way they're both in here, like that. And then what I would do is I'd grab both of these frames.
Villager later.
Oh, you're right. Thank you. Goes right there.
Oops.
So now both of these, I want to get them to the right size. So I'll turn on my edit multiple frames, locking everything except for the dummy side. Control A to select both of those and scale them both up together and get them to the size that they should be for this. About there. Turn off edit multiple frames and unlock my layers. There we go. Now Caleb, right here, is going to get suddenly a lot bigger. So F6, make him big enough to where that foot is the size to kick that dummy based on the animatic. Might even be bigger than that. Kind of like this. There we go. And then shot 4. So again, Caleb's going to be almost about the same size, I believe, because his foot comes down in frame. I think he actually shrinks just a little bit, kind of like that. There we go. This dummy side does not appear in shot 4. So shot 4, blank keyframe, it goes away. But this dummy appears. We'll kind of put him over here. He's a little bit bigger than that, though, starting off. Kind of like that. Then shot 5. The dummy full goes away, F7. Caleb gets an F6. And he shrinks back down again. Kind of like that. And that goes all the way to the end. Shift F5. So now, if we watch this...
And now, you are safe.
So there. We've basically set up this file to be handed off to animators. Is there anything else I'm missing? Save your document and double check to make sure you didn't forget anything. If everything looks good, then you are ready to begin animation. Now, if you want to see the actual layout that we did for this back in 2014, let's look at it. Layout example, here it is. So let's open this up real fast. Real fast. There we go. So here's the actual layout, because we did have backgrounds done when we were animating this. So let's watch this. Let's just Control Enter and Swift it out.
And now you are safe.
That spinning dirk always cracks me up. And there we go. That is set up for animation. That's where we would then hand off this file to an animator, and they could begin animating with it. Everything is good to go, baby. All right. So now that we've prepped the Flash file, we move on to rough posing. So you might think that puppet animation is just all about cheating and hey, it's puppets and we'll just, start moving the puppet and messing with the puppet. But no, puppet animation is practically no different from traditional animation. You still start off the exact same way that you do traditional animation, which is you do a rough pass where you turn off your puppet, you grab yourself a Cintiq pen, and you start drawing in your rough pass for how you, the animator, plan on actually animating. For example, here's a shot from the animatic. It's a little loosey-goosey. The storyboarder, it's not the storyboarder's job to make everything look perfectly on model and amazing. Storyboarder's job is just to describe dialogue, expression, and camera. So the animator drew over this to clean up the drawing, put everything more proportionally accurate, and the animator felt like sort of changing the pose a little bit. Straightening out the legs, having the arms kind of corner up like this, having more fun with the tail plopping down. The animator doesn't have to follow the animatic perfectly. They have the creative freedom to change it up a little bit. Then, the next part of the animatic was this pose of him looking back up. So the animator felt the need to redraw it a little bit. They got the legs a little bit more on model, gave it more of a cute curve, kind of got the tail more proportionally accurate, kind of wanted his hands to start from the same position that he drew them in the last one, so it cleans it up a little bit more. Then, character sort of gets back on its feet for Caleb here. Animator wanted to redraw that as well. He wanted the arm more down here. It looked a little bit more angry. He wanted the tail to come up and break the silhouette to make it into a more appealing shot. He wanted to have the arm a little bit thicker. Redrew the face to get it more on model. Then he leaps off frame. And again, the animator wanted to tweak that. The way that you would leap off frame in reality is you wouldn't keep both legs behind you. You'd have like one leg lifted up and then another leg down to sort of balance your body while in the air. And then again, we have this shot from the animatic where he's kicking towards screen. But it's pretty rough, so the animator needed to redraw over it, get everything more proportionally accurate, clean up the drawing, get everything looking a little bit better. Added the tail in there, which the animatic didn't have. Then here's Caleb looking all out of breath. Again, the animator felt the need to redraw that pretty drastically and really show off that facial expression in more detail. Drew in his own custom mouth. Kind of tweaked the way that the arms were hanging off the sides. Give it a nice arc with the torso. And then animator. Caleb's going, and now you are safe. So, again, animator felt the need to redraw it. Really kind of tweaked the mouth. Got the jaw and the skeletal structure to feel a little bit more grounded. Tweaked this arm to give it a more unique, kind of straight down shape, which felt really great. And then finally, the animatic actually had the exact same drawing for both of these. But the animator felt the need to actually have a second drawing for the "you are safe" line. And he wanted Caleb, the character, to actually back away off screen by walking backwards, just to make it more appealing as far as the character's acting is concerned. So this is a rough pass. So the animator actually had to jump in and draw over the animatic to clean it up, get it more on model, and really push the acting of the character. Now, if we want to see what that rough posing example looks like, I've got the Flash file here, but let's just open up the SWIF.
And now you are safe.
Let's watch that one more time.
And now you are safe.
So that's a great rough pass. That's fantastic. That's the ideal rough pass you'd want to have as a puppet animator. Now, there are a lot of different ways of doing puppet animation, and I probably should have mentioned this in the beginning of this tutorial. The way that I'm showing you right now is the way that I go about doing my own puppet animation. But everyone approaches this differently. We have animators on staff right now that do a completely different thing for rough posing. Some of them don't even do rough posing. Some of them will go way overboard and actually almost fully animate the whole thing as a traditionally animated rough posed animation. And that's okay. As long as you feel comfortable with what you've roughed out. You want to get that rough posed pass done first before you jump into actually posing out the puppet, especially if you're fairly new to puppet animation. If you've been puppet animating for years and years and years and years and you feel very confident in your ability to puppet animate, then I might even venture so far as to say that you might not even need to do a rough posing pass. But I would say that if you're new to it and you're not confident in your abilities to keep puppets on model and to make them look lifelike and traditional, then I would recommend, at the bare minimum, doing the rough posing pass that I've shown you for this tutorial, where you've basically just redrawn the key poses to put them a little bit more on model and matching the character. At bare minimum, that's what I would recommend doing if you're starting out. Okay, so after you've got a rough posing pass, the next step is to actually grab that puppet and start breaking that puppet apart to make it match your rough pose. And I promise you, or at least I highly recommend, that the drawing that you did for the rough pose, you should make the puppet perfectly match that rough pose. You might still tweak a couple things, but overall, though, you need to break that puppet and force it to match the pose you did. Which is a hard thing to do, because as I'm sure you've already seen from our previous tutorials, that when you're rigging these puppets, they're fairly stiff. Like, they're not curved at all. They don't have other angles and crazy things in them. It's just a very simple, stiff turnaround. In other words, you will never be able to start off with a puppet right from the get-go where it has all of the parts necessary to make it match the dynamic and appealing angles and silhouettes that you have drawn out for your rough pass. You have to break the puppet. You have to force it to match what you've drawn. This is a great drawing, but that Caleb puppet that we saw in the very beginning, there's no way that we could make that puppet look like this unless we draw in new parts and break the puppet and force it to match the drawing. Same thing over here. This is a crazy, very dynamic pose for Caleb here. The original puppet would not be able to do this unless we break it and jump into those parts and mess with the vertices. Vertices, I was teaching Maya a while ago. The anchor points, and force it to match the pose. And then again, even something as simple as this still requires a couple of redrawn parts for it to make it match. Let's look at those other ones over here. So, great drawing, dynamic drawing. You gotta break the puppet and draw in new parts and force it to follow those parts. Again, great pose. The original puppet wouldn't be able to do this. And then, bam. You can still force the puppet to do it by using the envelope tool or the art brush, or just grabbing the anchor points and manipulating it to create the parts inside of there, or, like in the case of this mouth, drawing in a whole new part from scratch. Again, great pose. Break the puppet and force it to follow that pose. Finally, great pose. Break that puppet and force it to follow that pose. I promise you, If you actually force the puppet to follow your rough posing, then not only will your puppet animation look beautiful and traditionally animated and amazing by the end, but it's going to make the next several phases of this animation pipeline 100 times easier and 100 times faster. In fact, breaking the puppet to match the pose, doing a key pose pass, in other words, a puppet posing pass, that is the longest part of puppet animation, the most frustrating part. It's the part that makes or breaks you as a puppet animator. When I was working at Floyd County Productions, that was pretty much all we spent the entire week on. Like, the week when we were doing the posing pass was breaking apart the puppets and redrawing all the pieces and grabbing the envelope tool and curving everything to make them match what the storyboarder had done. It took a while because it was basically rebuilding kind of a whole puppet from scratch as we were breaking it. But it made it so much easier for the studio that we outsourced all of our animation to down the line.
The thing is that breaking apart the puppet, that's not a suggestion. That's something you do, period, in the industry. When you animate with a puppet, you're supposed to push the puppet. You're not supposed to stay in the confines of it. Even in very, trying to think what companies, like Slap Happy, Fusion TV, even companies that do like very pose-to-pose heavy animation, they still break apart the puppets because they need to get curves, they need to get extreme poses. So this is something you need to know if you want to animate puppets professionally.
Absolutely. Phil is 110% right. It's not an option. You have to break them apart. I mean, one of the biggest compliments we get at Skydynamic Studios when we show our animation off to outsiders is they're always like, oh my god, that's puppet animation? That looks like you did it traditionally. That looks amazing. Well, this is the secret. This is why our puppet animation looks traditional, because we take the necessary time during this moment to break the puppet apart and force it to match the rough posing drawings that we do before we get to this point.
I remember one time you said during one tutorial that sometimes at Floyd County you would get people who would sometimes not even really use the pre-made puppet parts. They would just like redraw almost everything in it. So I think that's pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, just for the sake of this tutorial series, one of our animators currently on staff, Victor Urez, Victor is like that. Like, he doesn't even need the base puppet. He just creates a whole brand new puppet from scratch for the particular shot he's animating. And it's actually what we do as well. For a lot of the animation we've done for Skydynamic, if we have a character that's appearing for just like 1 or 2 shots, we're not going to make a puppet for it. We're just going to hand off the shot and the illustrations to an animator, and they're just going to vector it and create a puppet for it right from the get-go. In fact, it's the way that we've been doing all of our GIF animations lately as well. We just rig it and create the puppet for that shot, and that's the way we do it.
The thing with animating puppets is that, I guess just because when they got introduced, there was such a stigma on how you animate puppets. It's because it's a cheap and affordable way to reuse the same drawings without having to constantly do holds. Like, if you watch a really old Disney movie, there's like 1,000 in-betweens for just a character holding. Whereas nowadays, just use a puppet and, you save like 3-4 hours of work right there. But the problem was that these were used as a very low-budget way to save costs on animation. They were used on very tacky, very underproduced shows that didn't take full advantage of how fluid these things could be. So the thing with GIF animations and the thing with the puppet animations is that basically the puppets work as a key, and you basically need to exaggerate the keys when you animate, and then you need to figure out the in-betweens from there. So the idea with puppeting is that it's not supposed to replace frame-by-frame animation. It's to help basically be more thrifty with frame-by-frame animation. You basically need to think everything in terms of keys and in-betweens the same way you're taught in school. The very Disney-esque way of thinking. And then when something doesn't need to be redrawn, well, then you don't need to redraw it. So it's a thing with our studio right now, is that with these puppets and with our animation style, is that you don't need to be limiting yourself by what you can do with the animation. You can achieve like whatever you want with puppets. You just need to be willing to put in the time and effort to do it. As you see from the GIFs, they start out very archaic, you know, it's just standard pose, 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 pose. It was nice, you know. That's what usual GIFs look like. It looks like something from a Hallmark card. But then we were like, hey, what if we start, you know, breaking apart this arm, and we started doing more fluid movements? And now, like, compare, say, the Dylan Dolee GIF to the Garth Boris GIF, and see how unbelievably fluid the characters move now.
Exactly. To basically conclude this particular part of the tutorial, the best way of thinking about this is that puppet animation is not a cheaper, easier way of animating. It's not a different kind of animation either. It is traditional animation. The only difference is what you do after you have key poses. But everything leading up to the key pose phase is the exact same thing as traditional animation. Which actually brings us to our next area. So before we go any further, let me actually show you what this animation looks like with the puppet posings. Let's open up that SWF.
And now you are safe.
Let's watch that one more time.
And now you are
And stuff
safe.
like this becomes more apparent in the pilot when we need to do like the best animation we can.
Exactly.
Unless the puppet is beyond, like, I've worked with some really bad puppets. Unless the puppet is like horribly made beyond any rational belief that makes you wonder, oh my god, how did the person who made this even got employed in the industry? There's no reason for why you can't do fluid animation with the puppet. Is it going to take some time to figure out? Of course, of course. You're basically, what you're doing with this is that you're animating it traditionally, and then you're kind of using the puppet like a jigsaw puzzle. You're putting all the little bits and pieces where they need to go, and then locking them together.
Exactly. So one of the best ways to actually break a puppet apart and force it to match the rough drawings you do is to actually just legitimately redraw parts. So if we jump into these guys real fast, because these are actually rigged puppets, these aren't just drawings, you'll notice that whenever there's a redrawn part, we like to actually grab a brush tool, draw the part, and then fill it in with the color from the character. But we leave the red line of the brush tool there to let us know that that part has been drawn in and it's not actually a perfectly vectored piece. That way, after the animation's all done, we can hand it off to vector artists and they can revector it. But the idea, though, is that, you know, this torso originally was just this shape right here. But the animator created a new keyframe inside of the Caleb torso symbol and drew in their own custom torso. And then outside of it, they just set the symbol to frame 2. Single frame. Same thing with this foot. The original foot, they didn't have that foot. None of the foots that we had in here matched the foot that they needed. So they just created a new frame on frame 95, drew in a new foot with the brush tool, filled it in with Caleb's skin color, and then set the symbol to frame 95. Same thing with this hand. They needed this hand. They didn't have it in any of the hands that were currently here. They drew in their own hand on frame 2, and then outside set the frame to frame 2. Drawing in your own custom parts is the key to success. Not just that, but look how smooth they got this leg to look with that great solid line. That's a very hard thing to do with the base puppets because their legs and their arms are split up into two pieces, a lower arm and an upper arm, or a lower leg and an upper leg. Getting those two parts to seamlessly, perfectly blend into each other is impossible. So what this animator did is they just cheated. It's all just one piece. They just went inside. This used to be the very bottom part of his leg, Caleb calf far, the calf leg. And they just created a new layer and just drew in the entire leg all inside of this one symbol, deleted the other symbol, the other leg that doesn't need to be there anymore, and then just set it to frame 2. And there you go. You got the whole leg as just one giant symbol. I think they did the exact same thing. Well, no, this actually is 2 pieces. So that they kept the 2 pieces for that. I think they kept the 2 pieces for this too. But let's come over here. What about this pose? Did they keep the 2 pieces for these? Nope. They just cheated it. They knew that they weren't going to animate him actually bending this leg, so they just drew the entire bent leg in one symbol. Same thing here. This entire bent leg is just drawn inside of one symbol because, again, there's no point in trying to make the 2 different leg pieces look like they're bending when you can just cheat it and get away with just drawing one of them. Same thing with this arm. This arm is just one symbol, and this arm is just one symbol. In other words, all of these different ligaments are just single symbols. It's one of the easiest ways to cheat it. It's very rare that you actually keep both parts of the arms. Usually you can get away with cheating it and just converting them into just one big symbol and deleting the other piece temporarily. And look at that. Again, we have a great solid forced perspective leg, but they just did it again by just drawing one leg. Same thing here. Yep. Same thing here. Yep. Same thing here. Yep. Again, they're just cheating it. It's wonderful. So, after you've done all of your key posing, and you've broken the puppet, and you forced it to match the rough, and you drew in new parts, and you even deleted other parts of legs and just stretched out the leg and made it one solid piece to make it a more appealing shape, the next step is pretty easy. You do breakdowns. So what are breakdowns? Breakdowns are poses in between key poses that further enhance and define the action. So, for example, we've got these 2 key poses right here. Caleb's on his back. Caleb is standing. This is what the animatic had. But the animator felt the need to put an extra pose in between these 2 to let themselves know how they were going to go about animating him from going on his back to on his knee. And this is how they chose to do it. This is a great key pose. This is letting them know, okay, when I animate this, I want him to actually swing around forward, and then he'll come up onto his knee like that. Now, you could have gone the other way. Maybe he's going to swing around backwards and actually flip the other direction. That would have required a completely different breakdown. But a breakdown pose will further enable an audience or the average layman to look at your animation and understand what the character is doing. For example, again, here's a key pose. And now you are safe. So Caleb's looking back, and then he's kind of bowed. But again, how does he go from here to here? If you don't, like right now, if there was no breakdown, this arm would animate going straight out. This arm would come down over the chest, and he would go straight down and close his eyes to get from here to here. But the animator didn't want that. They wanted there to be an extra breakdown for a flourish. So the breakdown for this is that. He actually wanted Caleb to go up first in a really good, dramatic, overacting sort of anticipation, and then go down. That is something that was required. He had to make that breakdown before going into the next key pose. So breakdown poses help you to better define your key poses. So if we look at this now with breakdowns added in, it should hopefully start to make a lot more sense.
And now you are safe.
Let's watch that again.
And now you are safe.
So it's so much more readable now, isn't it? Like you can see Caleb when he breathes in and breathes out and breathes in and breathes out. You can see a lot more of his movement that starts to make a lot more sense. It honestly, like, to be honest with you, if this were South Park Studios, that would be finished animation right there. South Park is pretty much just keys and breakdowns. Because at the end of the day, that's really all you need to show what the character is doing. That's when you know that you've actually fully achieved a key pose and a breakdown pass. When everything is readable, where there is no ambiguity, there's no questioning, what is this character doing? No. If you have good keys and you have good breakdowns, you should fully understand at a glance, yes, this is what my character is doing. All right, so after you have your breakdowns added in, and you feel like you can understand what the character is doing, the next step is usually to do lip syncing. It's completely up to you, though. I usually do lip syncing. Remember, this tutorial is my method of animation. I know a lot of animators that will just do lip syncing actually at the very, very beginning before they even start posing the puppet. Or they'll actually do all of the animation perfectly and then save lip syncing for the very, very end. There is no right or wrong way of going about it. For me personally, I like to do a key pose pass. Well, I like to do a rough pass. I like to do a key pose pass. I like to do a breakdowns pass. And then I'll go ahead and knock out all of my lip syncing then. Or at least the major mouth shapes to follow the breakdown. Now, when you're doing lip syncing, ideally, you want to try and work with 12 basic mouths. Which are the 12 fundamental phonic shapes or phonic sounds you hear when basically whenever someone's saying anything. So let me show you these phonic shapes. So the first one is a closed mouth, which is m, b, and p. The second one is an open mouth but with clenched teeth for t, s, z, ch, and sh. The next four are the same mouth that's slowly opening for ah, going louder. So we want those four mouths for a mouth slowly opening with upper teeth showing, A1, A2, A3, and A4. Then, open mouth, but with a tongue lifted up and touching the back of the teeth for la and na. Then, an open mouth where the inner cheeks are being pushed in a bit and the upper lip lifts up ever so slightly, and you're indicating that the lower lip is pushing out for wa and ra. Then, a nice O mouth for oo, q, and oo. Then, a closed mouth, but you're biting the lower lip. Fa, va. And then an open mouth, but we see the upper teeth and the lower teeth at the same time for E. E. And then finally, an open mouth where we see the upper teeth and lower teeth, but it's sort of biting the tongue for the. And those are the 12 basic mouths. You can usually animate any lip syncing that exists, period, no matter what the language is, as long as you have at least these 12 shapes. Now, this is really important. You want these shapes here. You don't want to try and get away with less, like crappy anime. Because, believe it or not, and I know this is going to seem really weird, but it's the shape of the mouth that defines the sound, not the other way around. It's not the sound that is defining the sound. It's actually what you're seeing that defines what you're hearing. I know that, doesn't seem true, but let's watch a video real fast, and let me actually prove it to you. It's called the McGurk effect. Let's watch this. It's about 5 minutes long.
At any one moment, we are being bombarded by sensory information. Our brains do a remarkable job of making sense of it all. It seems easy enough to separate the sounds we hear from the sights we see. But there is one illusion that reveals this isn't always the case.
Ba, ba, ba.
Have a look at this. What do you hear?
Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba.
But look what happens when we change the picture.
Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba. Ba.
And yet, the sound hasn't changed. In every clip, you are only ever hearing ba with a B.
Ba, ba. Ba,
It's an illusion known as the McGurk effect.
ba,
Take another look.
ba,
Concentrate first on the right of the screen.
ba,
Now to the left of the screen.
ba.
The illusion occurs because what you are seeing clashes with what you are hearing.
In the illusion, what we see overrides what we hear. So the mouth movements we see as we look at a face can actually influence what we believe we're hearing. If we close our eyes, we actually hear the sound as it is. If we open our eyes, we actually see how the mouth movements can influence what we're hearing. Ba, ba, ba.
It's a bizarre effect. Remember, the only sound you're hearing is ba with a B.
Ba, 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 ba.
What's remarkable about this illusion is even knowing how it's done doesn't seem to make a difference.
Ba. The effect works no matter how much you know about the effect. I've been studying the McGurk effect for 25 years now, and I've been the face in the stimuli. I've seen stimuli thousands of times, but the effect still works on me. I can't help it. The speech brain just takes in that information and doesn't care about what outside knowledge you bring to bear. Ba, 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 ba.
The McGurk effect shows us that what we hear may not always be the truth.
Ba,
But it also helps us to understand what happens when our senses conflict.
ba, ba, ba. When the brain has the conflicting information, it tries to make sense of that conflict. And depending on what type of modality is providing more, I guess, salient information, that information might override or at least combine with the other information.
So we can't always trust what we hear, because sometimes our sense of vision takes over, enabling us to maintain a coherent view of the world.
It's pretty cool and slightly creepy. It's amazing how just the shapes of your lip syncing can determine what you're actually hearing. So if you have a character's name is Bucky, you probably want to make sure that you have a B shape and not an F shape. Otherwise, you could, get your show banned from television. So, now that you guys know a little bit more about the McGurk effect, you know about, at the very least, the 12 minimum phonic shapes you should have for your lip syncing. The next step is to actually create 3 different sets of that lip syncing. We call it the up, the down, and the neutral. So for excited and happy or positive emotions, for negative emotions, and for just bland neutral emotions. Now, we use up, down, and neutral instead of happy, sad, and bored, because sometimes a happy mouth doesn't necessarily, or an up mouth doesn't necessarily mean that the character is happy. They could be horribly angry, but they're just like, they're trying to hold it back with happy mouths. Or they're being very sarcastic. Like, using the words happy, sad, and bored is actually going to subconsciously limit you and not allow you to use the mouths to their full potential. So every single puppet that we make here at Skydynamic Studios, we always rig in these 3 different generic states, an up, a down, and a neutral. Although, I would say like over half of the mouths that you animate with, you probably just want to create them custom yourself to really push the facial expression and pose of the character's face. Now, I think these are symbols. So yeah, if I If I jump inside, you can see all the different mouths for the ups. If I jump into the down, you can see all the different mouths for the down. I think I have to jump in one more. And then I think the neutral, I didn't actually rig it for that, which is fine. Okay. Let's keep going. What else with lip syncing is important? Well, when lip syncing, it's also important that you animate on twos and you try not to over animate. In fact, I would say almost every single animator that's ever animated lip syncing for the very, very first time, myself included, will always make the same mistake. Because we're going through the audio very, very slowly and listening to everything frame by frame, we try our very best to like have the entire sound hitting every single mouth shape. Because that's the way it looks when we're going through it slow. But then, to our horror, when we watch it at real time later, it looks weird and janky and like either too fast or too slow, which is freaky. And it doesn't make any sense. I have two examples here of lip syncing for Caleb. I have a bad example and a good example. I'm going to dive into the symbol. And let's just play this. What is he saying?
Split Paw, land of heroes. Well, I've actually never met any, but there's so many tales about heroes, there have to be some, right?
So here's the creepy part. I want you to just focus your eyes on the bad one. Look directly at the bad example and nothing else, and watch the bad example. Let's watch this again.
Split Paw, land of heroes. Well, I've actually never met any, but there's so many tales about heroes, there have to be some, right?
It actually looks perfectly on par, like it's hitting every single word, the mouths are forming all the right shapes. When you look directly at the bad example, it actually makes perfect sense. Okay, well, let's look directly at the good example. Focus on nothing else, only look at the good example.
Split Paw, land of heroes. Well, I've actually never met any, but there's so many tales about heroes, there have to be some, right?
Now you'll notice that the good example actually looks a little worse than the bad example. Like the good one, it didn't really have all the shapes that were needed for that particular lip syncing. It actually left out some shapes, and it kind of felt a little bit slower. Okay, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to focus your eyes on this little dot in the center. Focus your eyes on the center and don't actually look at the bad or look at the good. Look at the center dot and let your peripheral vision take in the two examples. Let's try it one more time.
Split Paw, land of heroes. Well, I've actually never met any, but there's so many tales about heroes, there have to be some, right?
Now, what you should have noticed was the bad example felt like the mouths weren't actually following the dialogue. It felt like he was going super, super quick with them and they felt really weird. But the good example actually felt spot on. It felt like it was hitting all the lip syncing pretty well. Let's try that one more time. Stare straight at the dot in the middle. Only let your peripheral vision take in the two. And let's watch it once more.
Split Paw, land of heroes. Well, I've actually never met any, but there's so many tales about heroes, there have to be some, right?
So the reason why the bad example is the bad example, even though we know that when we look directly at it, everything is perfect, is because the bad example is hitting every single possible phonic sound that is coming from that piece of dialogue. In other words, a lot of these mouths are animated on ones for the way that the animator went about animating this. Look at all these ones that are spread throughout here. But the good example, the animator actually purposefully forced themselves to only animate on twos, forcing them to not actually hit every single possible phonic sound. Now, when you force yourself to animate on twos, you're actually going to wind up with a more realistic looking lip sync. And here's why. When we're watching somebody speak, even if it is an animation, if it's a cartoon character or somebody in real life, we're not looking at their mouth. We're looking usually around their eyes in the center of their face. So whenever we see a mouth speaking, it's usually from our peripheral vision, or it's slightly out of focus. That's the reason why we like the good example. We actually like the idea that we're trying to purposefully limit ourselves to make it look more real. In other words, from doing less, we're actually making it look more real. In fact, if you actually go to the mirror and just look at yourself in the mirror as you talk, naturally, as humans, we actually do bridge together multiple words into one open mouth shape. It's just the way that we talk. It's the way that we make sound. So if you actually go and you try to close the mouth after every single word and hit every single consonant, it doesn't look real because that's just not the way that we really talk. So my advice to you beginning lip sync animators is what I do as an animator, and keep in mind this is just myself, every animator has a slightly different way of going about it, is I'll actually go through all of the animation and force myself to not only stick to twos, but only do the vowels first. Hello, my name is Zach. I'll actually only animate L, I, A. Just the vowel shapes, only the open mouth shapes. And make sure that at bare minimum, I have all of the open mouth shapes rigged in and animated. Then, all of the empty space that I have in between those vowel shapes, I'll put some consonants in. Fa, ba, pa, ta, cha, sha, la. And that way, I'm actually forcing myself to not hit every single closed mouth or consonant shape. I'm hitting all the vowels, though, all the open mouth shapes, but not all the consonant shapes. That's what you want to do. That's a really good way of forcing yourself as a novice to have some better lip syncing. One last piece of advice for lip syncing is to pop your mouths. Now, what do I mean by that? So, Caleb here is about to say split paw.
Split paw, split paw, split paw, split paw.
Split paw, split paw. But whenever he goes to open up a mouth, we pop it open to its largest mouth, and then we take our time closing it. Again, pop it open from closed all the way to the largest, pop it, and then we take our time closing it. Now, if you want to make your lip syncing look better immediately, just pop open your mouths. Always pop them open very quickly and then take your time with a couple of frames closing it. And then if you're going to open it again, pop it open to the largest, take your time closing it. Pop open, take your time closing it. Pop open, take your time closing it. That is also going to make your animation look 10 times better as far as lip syncing is concerned. Oh.
It should be prudent to point out, this is just how lip sync works in animation, period. You do not enunciate every single syllable, vowel, or what have you when you're speaking. If I remember, like the best example I can remember was from Richard Williams, actually. The idea is you have a selected number of consonants and vowels you say when you say something. So like if you're saying, I love you, you say, ah, o, u. You have an A shape, an L shape, and an O shape. So you say ah, u. That show. So basically, the example is that you could have a character who's basically saying I love you, but at the same time, they could be saying something like elephant juice. You basically have the shapes right there, and then you just in between from there. Yeah, like all live, all of. So if you say an A shape, and then a F shape, that's how you lip sync. You don't go, I love you. Unless it's like a very specific scene where a character is deliberately enunciating something very fluidly. Then you do something like that. I mean, not even Disney does that. And Disney is like ridiculous when it comes to like a lot of unnecessary detail.
Yeah, so you just want to be careful to not accidentally over animate, which is one of the faux pas that most novice animators make. In fact, I hate to admit it, but you could even get away with not even showing a lot of these phonic shapes. For example, a lot of Japanese or Eastern animation doesn't actually create all of the mouth shapes like we do over here in the West. Go watch an anime, look how many mouth shapes they have over there, and then go watch, you know, like a SpongeBob SquarePants or a cartoon over here in America, and it's like night and day. But we don't mind. They both still work because both of them are good examples of not over animating. They're just extreme cases. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on with this lecture. Let me jump out of this symbol here and let's keep going. So the last step in your animation, after you've gotten your rough pass, you did your key pose pass or the puppet pass, you did your breakdowns, you did your lip syncing, or you decided to do lip syncing later. The next and final step is in-betweening. And this is where puppet animation shines. This is the reason why like 90% of television animation over here in the West is puppet animation, because the hardest part of traditional animation is the in-betweening, having to draw that character over and over and over and over again to fluidly make it move from point A to point B. You don't have to do that in puppet animation. Puppet animation, once you hit this point, you don't have to draw the character. You don't have to break the character. You don't have to do anything with the character. It's just using the puppet parts and moving them around and you're done. That's the beautiful part of puppet animation. For example, we've got two keys right here. We've got Caleb here. And we want him to put his arm up. So here to here. Here to here. So how do we get that? Well, we start from here. And then we just moved that part down. We moved that part up. We kind of angled his head a bit. We then just flipped that, or we swapped it to the arm that we'd already created over here. Just moved that one up. We swapped the hand. Then again, moved it up, swapped the arm, and just moved it up, started him blinking, and there you go. He got to there. It's just taking the parts that you've already painstakingly over several hours crafted and just moving them. That's all you're doing. It's the easiest thing in the world. That's the beauty of puppet animation. This part that normally takes the longest with traditional is the shortest with puppet. It's the reason why puppet animation, if you're going to animate 10 seconds of puppet animation, a really good professional puppet animator sitting down from start to finish can finish a 10-second scene. Keep in mind, going from nothing to full color finished in like 2 days, maybe 3 days tops. Doing that exact same thing in traditional animation would take a week, if not 2 weeks, because you have to go through inking and coloring and tweening and all those extra phases of that animation pipeline, which you don't have to do with puppet animation because it's already clean, it's already colored. Let's take a look at the same example we've been looking at so far, but let's look at the in-betweens. What does this look like with all the in-betweens in there?
And now you are safe. And now you are safe.
Which is pretty fantastic. But keep in mind that all those extra parts that were drawn still have the red outline around them. So what we then do is we take that away from the animator, we hand it off to a vector artist, they go in there one by one, and they basically just vector out those parts and clean them up and make them look good, which turns it into this. And there's no sound. But all the parts have been drawn over, they've all been cleaned up, they've all been perfected to make a basically finished animation.
And something you see right here with the animation, this is something that like has to carry over to the pilot. It's just pose, pose, pose. See, like that kick. It's basically two poses. You go from the one pose and then you shift around his weight to get to the secondary pose.
Yep, completely agreed. Pose to pose is what we call an animation, and we like that snappiness. We like that going pose to pose. We don't like it when you leave the character always moving and fluidly going around, and it feels really weird. We try to avoid that. So now that we're sort of at the end of our tutorial, let's very quickly just kind of summarize. So you start off with a layout example.
And now you are safe.
Then you do a rough posing example, or pass.
And now you are safe.
You then do a puppet posing pass.
And now you are safe.
Then you do a breakdowns pass.
And now you are safe.
And then finally an in-betweens pass, which usually includes lip syncing as well.
And now you are safe.
And that's the way we do it. So, if you guys want to watch that entire Caleb intro animation, since we did look at the screenplay and we looked at the storyboards and we looked at the animatic, let's just take a quick couple of minutes here and let's just show off that finished animation and what we actually released online back in 2014.
Stay back, villagers! I'll save you! Ah! Ha! And now you are safe. Ah, you see? They're not that dangerous. They just need a little understanding. Come on, Caleb, you've trained for this. Yeah, I have trained for this. I hope you have wings. And Caleb Truetail saves the day again. You won't tell anyone about this, right?
All right. And there you have it, everybody. Does anybody in the chat currently have any questions before we cut off the recording?
I don't think so.
I'm good. That was cool.
Yeah, hopefully by the end of this,
Yeah.
you all feel like you have a better sense of the Flash puppet animation pipeline. And at the very least, my process for going about it. All right, so what are we going to be doing with the next and final tutorial for this entire Flash puppet series? Well, the next one's actually going to be a demo. I'm going to spend a good solid hour and a half to 2 hours, and I'm just going to animate a whole bunch of stuff in front of you guys. I'm going to start off by doing a head turn and showing you how to do facial animation and moving it around the head to make it look 2.5D. I'm going to do some dialogue and some facial animation to some lip syncing and show you how I go about doing lip syncing and show it to you rather than just talking about it. I'll then have some already drawn rough, and I'll start taking that rigid Caleb puppet and using the envelope tool and the art brush tool and drawing in new parts, force it to pose the puppet to some rough. And I'll show you how I go about breaking the puppet. And then I'll finally end off by actually having some already created key poses, and I'll just show you how I go about tweening the puppet in between those key poses. That way you basically get a good sense of how I go about every single one of these parts of the puppet animation pipeline. And I'm hoping that eventually in the future that we have our other animators also create their own little videos as well to show you how they go about doing this, because I promise you the way that I go about it isn't the one and only way of doing it. There's actually multiple ways of going about puppet animation, and all of our animators have their own little sort of peculiarities with how they approach it. And it's pretty cool. And that's what next week's going to be about. So hopefully I'll see you guys then. For those of you that are watching this recording, well, it's going to be immediate for you. Just watch the next recording, and it'll be all fun, and it'll be our final lecture. Thanks a lot, everyone.